In this video, we're going to take a look at the three different types of loops that you have at your disposal. Keep in mind, with any loops in Lua, you always have the ability to nest them, which is to put one to the other. The first one is going to be the simplest type of loop that you'll probably encounter, and that's going to be for the purposes of definite iteration. That's using a for loop. Using a for loop is a relatively straightforward experience. We're going to start by typing in the word for. Now we're going to create a variable which is going to act as our counting variable. In this case, I'll just use x equals. And now we're simply going to say which value we want this value to start at. So in case I wanted to start at the number 1, I can simply say x equals 1. Now what I have to do is do a comma and then type in how we increment the particular value and what is our maximum value. In this case, we'll stop counting once we get to 100. Now we're going to do a comma, and now we can define how much we count up by each time we do complete an iteration. In this case, I'll go ahead and say 5. Afterwards, we're going to type in the word do, which simply says, okay, this is what I want you to do after you get that count going. And now all we have to do is define exactly what we want this particular loop to do. In this case, I'm simply going to print the value of my iterator. Now, at the end of any loop, you must type in the word end, or the loop will go on or give you syntax errors immediately. So if I run this code now, you'll see that it is able to quickly iterate through all these different pieces, and it's counting up by 5s. So if I were to change this, for example, and say 1s, I could go ahead and press that, and you can see that it quickly counts up to 100. Now, one of the great uses of for loops, of course, is giving us the ability to surf through items in a list, as we saw in the previous video. Another really, really good use for a for loop is if we need to do something a set number of times. It is an excellent method to do so. The next type of loop we're going to take a look at is what they call a while loop. A while loop is designed to wait for something until something happens. While loops are very dangerous because you can run into a situation where you have an infinite loop if the particular item that you're waiting for never actually becomes true. So to do a while loop, we're simply going to type in the word while, and then we're going to define what we're waiting for. And again, as long as the statement is true, the loop will continue. So in this case, I will go ahead and create a variable real fast. We'll say var equals 0. Actually, we'll keep it consistent. We'll say x is 0. We'll say while x is less than 100. We're going to say the word do. And then at the end of our loop, we're going to say the word end. Now, if I were to type in print x, you would expect this to go ahead and display all the values that we saw previously. The problem we're going to run into here is if we were to actually run this code, what will happen is we'll go on an infinite number of times, and the value that will be displayed on the screen will be a constant 0. The reason for this is that this while loop never will ever exceed a value of 100 because the value of x remains constant. Now, the nice thing about a while loop is we can use it to do things such as check the altitude of terrain over a distance or anything along those. So what I'm going to do here is I'm simply going to take the value of x and I'm going to add 1 to it each time we iterate. So let's go ahead and hit the run and see what happens this time. And you can see this gives us a nice clean run. And the moment that x became a value of 100, it actually ended this loop and proceeded right down here. The last type of loop we're going to take a look at is going to be a repeat until loop. A repeat until loop is the same idea of a while loop, only in reverse. To set this up, we're simply going to type in the word repeat. And now we press enter and type in whatever we would like to do. In this case, we'll keep going with our previous examples. So go ahead and say print x. Go ahead and get our x value, x equals 0. And then afterwards, where you'd like your loop to actually iterate to, you type in the word until. So in this case, what are we waiting until? So in this case, let's say until x becomes greater than 100. Now, as always, this can become an infinite loop very, very quickly if we're not careful. We simply want to make sure that whatever we're doing has a finite number of iterations, even if we are waiting for something to happen. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say my x plus 1. And now when I run the output, it'll be exactly the same as we've seen each time. In this case, instead of waiting for something, we're going to keep doing something until something is achieved. This is a very, very powerful loop. For example, until score hits a certain value, until a unit gets to a certain altitude, until there's a certain number of damage to a unit. This is a very, very, very powerful tool for the purposes of this. Keep in mind, like I was saying, all types of iteration can be used internally and used in a nested format. For example, let's go ahead and now go back to our original loop. Say x equals 1. We'll go up to 10, and we'll go ahead and increment by 1, do. And now let's go ahead and create a second for loop on the inside. We'll call it for y equals 1, 10, 1, do. And we'll say right in the middle, print x. We'll go ahead and put a slash. And we'll say y. Now we'll simply put our little end comment here. Again, I'm trying to be internally consistent. And now if we run this command, what it will do is it will loop here and then loop that loop. So our values here are going to give us every value that we could possibly see between those two quickly iterated through. Now, one of the powerful reasons we can use this is we can have one type of iteration in the middle, perhaps waiting for something, while having the other part of iteration on the outside, basically continuing it a certain number of times. One of the uses I use for this, for example, is to scan underwater for a specific depth and then to place a unit at that particular position, or perhaps scan for a certain distance that we're interested in and go ahead and put something at that point once a random number is achieved. As you can see, iteration is a very, very powerful tool, but you must always watch out for the possibility of infinite iteration, which will go ahead and cause your entire scenario to basically hang until you restart it the hard way. Fortunately for us, there is a built-in feature should we need to, and that's called the break feature that we can use to bail from a loop at any time. So for example, if I created myself a while loop, we could say a while x is less than 100, x equals 0. Now we can go ahead and say do. And we could say print x. And then, of course, we could come down here and go ahead and end. Now, the interesting thing here is, like we said before, our x value will never actually change. So because of this, we end up in an infinite loop. But let's go ahead and now come up with a really, really over-the-top complicated way here to do this. I'm going to say while true, which is going to make this loop go on indefinitely here. Now what we can do now is, since this is an infinite loop, we can now put in a conditional inside of the actual loop itself, which will wait for something. So in this case, I'll say x equals x plus 1. And then I'll simply say if x is greater than 100, I'm going to type in the word break. And what this will do is this will go ahead and make it so that once it hits that particular point, it will automatically bail from the outer loop. Keep in mind, the break command only ends the most recent loop. So if I had another loop inside of here, we'd have to break from that loop to break from that loop. We'll have to make a quick adjustment. This is actually going to be the word then instead of the word do. Looks pretty good. And now we're going to go ahead and run this scenario. If everything worked correctly, we should quickly iterate through all the different options and automatically exit this main exterior loop as soon as we hit a value of 100, which is exactly what we intended for it to do. So like I said, as you can see, this very, very powerful tool that you have built in here. We can put these loops inside of individual scripts. We can use them to check different types of nodes. We can use them to check for the placement of units, place units. There's so much you can do with this. You can even go through every single item inside of an entire scenario one by one and then scan them for specific items.